In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible is unique among the documents of ancient history in positing an absolute beginning. The Bible boldly asserts that time is finite. In contrast, the Greeks and Romans of antiquity believed in the eternity of history. In the East, Hinduism and Buddhism imagine endless cycles of time, stretching into an indefinite past. For example, we learn from the Dalai Lama that there are multiple world systems in a constant state of coming into being and passing away. Now, the biblical writers didn't need to venture into this territory. They could have started with the Garden of Eden and left out the entire account of creation. Instead, the biblical narrative brazenly insists that the universe came into being at a particular instant in time as a voluntary act of creation by an eternal, supernatural being. Many modern scientists hold to the philosophy of materialism. The materialistic explanation of the universe is that everything is matter and energy and there is nothing else. Atheism is often a corollary of materialism, especially in the sense of denial of a supernatural personal God or any sort of higher creative power. Akin to the folly of Eastern religion and paganism, the atheist mythos has long contended for an eternal universe. A key doctrine of the atheist faith entails that if the universe is eternal, then it does not need a cause. Fortunately, science is not silent on this question. The second law of thermodynamics, or the entropy law, demands that the amount of usable energy in the universe is running down. Eventually, we know that the stars will burn out and the universe will suffer heat death. This means that the universe is winding down. Now, if it's winding down, it has to have been wound up. The universe is going to have an end. It had to have a beginning. There had to be a time when all the energy in the universe was usable. This marks the beginning of the universe. In addition, Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity demands that space and time had a beginning. This so troubled Einstein that he created a cosmological constant, or a cosmic fudge factor, to alter the clear implications of general relativity. He later called it the biggest mistake of his career because the cosmological fudge factor did not stand up to scientific scrutiny. In 1919, British cosmologist Arthur Eddington conducted an experiment during a solar eclipse which confirmed that general relativity was indeed true. No fudging necessary. The universe wasn't static, but it had a beginning. Eddington once wrote, "The idea of a universal mind, or logos, would be, I think, a fairly plausible inference from the present state of theory." Now, good scientific theories predict phenomena that have not yet been observed. Case in point, general relativity predicted an expanding universe, which would later be confirmed. In 1929, at Mount Wilson Observatory, astronomer Edwin Hubble made one of the greatest discoveries in history. He discovered that the universe is expanding at the same rate in all directions. Hubble observed the stars with a telescope and noticed they emitted a reddish light known as the Doppler effect. This meant that as time moves forward, the universe is growing apart. Now, it follows that if one went back in time, the universe would get denser and denser. Thus, if one goes back in time far enough, the universe would be contained in what scientists have called a point of infinite density, or singularity. Yet, a point can only be finitely dense. For a point to be infinitely dense, it would have to be non-existent. Therefore, all space and time came into existence from nothing a finite time ago. Now, in 1970, physicist Stephen Hawking and mathematician Roger Penrose wrote a famous paper that proved that given the truth of general relativity and the amount of matter in the known universe, the universe must have had a beginning. Hawking explains in A Brief History of Time. Hubble's discovery that the universe was expanding and the realization of the insignificance of our own planet in the vastness of the universe were just a starting point. As experimental and theoretical evidence mounted, it became more and more clear that the universe must have had a beginning in time. Now, returning back to our excursion through 20th century cosmological history, the atheist materialists dogmatically championed the eternal universe in what was called the steady state theory. In a vain effort to contest the theistic implications of general relativity and thermodynamics, steady-state theory argued that the universe was both infinite in size and eternal in duration. This required that new matter must be continuously created to keep the average density of the matter and usable energy equal over time. Atheistic materialist Fred Hoyle defended the steady state and, quite ironically, was the one that named the rival theory the Big Bang. He's quoted as saying that the Big Bang is an irrational process that cannot be described in scientific terms, nor challenged by appeal to observation. As was the case with general relativity, good scientific theories predict phenomena that have not yet been observed. Back in 1948, Russian physicist George Gamow came up with a new theory about the Big Bang. He decided that after the formation of the universe by a big explosion, a surplus of radiation should be left over uniformly spread throughout the universe. In the 1960s, two radio engineers working at Bell Labs, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, discovered some mysterious radiation coming from space. This radiation was not coming from a particular location, rather it was coming equally from all directions. In fact, it appeared to be coming from the universe itself. When the discovery was confirmed, it laid to rest any lingering suggestion that the universe is in an eternal steady state. Penzias and Wilson received a Nobel Prize for their discovery. Dr. Arno Penzias was quoted in the New York Times, March 12, 1978, as saying, "The best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the first 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, the Bible as a whole." His partner Robert Wilson is quoted as saying, "Certainly if you are religious, I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match with Genesis." After finding the predicted expanding universe and radiation afterglow, scientists turned their attention to another prediction that would confirm the Big Bang. If the Big Bang actually occurred, scientists believe that we should see slight variations or ripples in the temperature of the cosmic background radiation. These temperature ripples enabled matter to congregate by gravitational attraction into galaxies. In 1989, the search for these ripples was intensified when NASA launched the $200 million satellite called COBE, or Cosmic Background Explorer. Carrying extremely sensitive instruments, COBE was able to see whether or not these ripples actually existed in the background radiation and how precise they were. Within 8 minutes, COBE confirmed the existence of this primordial background radiation and the very precise ripples that were predicted. In 1992, astronomer George Smoot, the COBE project leader, said, "If you're religious, it's like looking at God." University of Chicago astrophysicist Michael Turner was no less enthusiastic, claiming, "The significance of this cannot be overstated. They have found the holy grail of cosmology." Cambridge astronomer Stephen Hawking also agreed, calling the findings the most important discovery of the century, if not of all time. The Big Bang took place with the explosion of the point that contained all the matter and energy in the universe. It dispersed into the universe with incredible speed. Out of this explosion came galaxies, stars, planets, our sun, the Earth, and the laws of physics themselves were formed. Now, explosions usually do not bring about order. All observed explosions tend to destroy and disintegrate order. Now, if we were to find a very detailed order as a result of an explosion, it would only be logical to conclude that there was an intelligent intervention behind this explosion. Working as an astronomer for the prestigious Institute of Astronomy at Cambridge University, Dr. Fred Hoyle had staunchly opposed the Big Bang by championing the steady-state cosmology, until he was convinced by the overwhelming evidence. However, that was not the fact that led him eventually to an intelligent design position. Although he originally professed the atheist faith, Hoyle proved he was truly willing to follow the scientific evidence wherever it leads. Good scientific theories make predictions which are later verified by evidence. While trying to work out the way stars manufacture chemical elements, Hoyle observed that one particular nuclear reaction, the triple alpha process, which generates carbon, would require the carbon nucleus to have a very specific energy for it to work. The large amount of carbon in the universe, which makes it possible for carbon-based life forms like human beings to exist, demonstrated that this nuclear reaction must work. Based on this notion, Hoyle made a prediction on the energy levels in the carbon nucleus that was later proven by experiment. However, these energy levels, while needed in order to produce carbon in large quantities, were statistically astronomically unlikely. Hoyle later wrote, "Would you not say to yourself, some super-calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom? Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule." Of course you would. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Hoyle was an atheist until that time, and said that this suggestion of a guiding hand left him greatly shaken. Consequently, he began to believe in God. Now, with this in mind, let's examine the data from the Cosmic Background Explorer, or COBE satellite, once more. COBE not only found ripples, but very precisely finely tuned ripples. The ripples show that the explosion and expansion of the universe was precisely tweaked to cause just enough matter to congregate to allow galaxy formation, but not enough to cause the universe to collapse back in on itself. Any slight variation one way or the other, and none of us would be here to tell about it. In fact, the ripples are so exact, down to 1 part in 100,000, that COBE project leader George Smoot called them the machining marks of the creation of the universe, and also the fingerprints of the maker. This fine-tuning clearly points to intelligent design. There are many such factors in the fine-tuning of the universe, as Oxford mathematician John Lennox explains.
More and more has been discovered by physicists and cosmologists that give evidence of a universe that's very finely tuned. That is, certain of its basic properties, the fundamental constants that govern what the universe is like, have to be within very, very finely defined limits in order to have a universe like we have on which carbon-based life is possible. And we call that the fine-tuning of the universe. For example, the ratio of the electromagnetic force to gravity in the early universe has to be accurate to about 1 part in 10 to the 40 in order that we can have the chemistry of the universe as we now see it. Now, 1 part in 10 to the 40, to get some idea of that, let's imagine that we covered, say, the whole of Russia with small coins, and we built the piles of coins over the whole of Russia to the height of the moon. And then we took 1 billion systems like that, and we painted one of the coins red, and we asked you to blindfold a friend and go and find it. They'd have got about 1 chance in 10 to the 40 of finding it. So it's a very small probability.
Now, the Genesis creation account was never intended to be a scientific explanation. It was written more to explain why God created man and what went wrong than to be a treatise on how he did it. Yet, with all of its elegant simplicity, it preempted modern scientists by some 3,000 years in its claim of a finite universe. Now you might ask, what about the age of the universe? Isn't that now the point of contention with modern science? Well, slowly but surely, man is catching up to that truth as well. The expansion factor of the universe, coupled with general relativity, has far-reaching implications. Now, looking back in time, cosmologists estimate that the universe is 15 to 16 billion years old. The Big Bang cosmology brings not just space and matter into existence, but time as well. Time is the 4th dimension. Now, how you see time depends on where you're viewing it from. Time is also affected by gravity. For example, a minute on the moon goes faster than a minute on the Earth, and a minute on the sun goes slower. Now, taking into account the expansion factor of the universe, every time the universe doubles, perception of time is cut in half. Now, when the universe was very small, in the beginning of time, it was doubling very rapidly. But as the universe gets bigger, the doubling gets exponentially longer. The rate of expansion quoted in the textbook, The Principles of Physical Cosmology, says that the expansion factor is roughly 10 to the 12th. Now, consider that the biblical creation account was dictated to Moses from God's perspective, not an earthbound perspective. Nuclear physicist Dr. Gerald Schroeder has calculated the duration of creation from the perspective of the singularity with rather surprising results. The calculations come out as follows. The first of the biblical days lasted 24 hours viewed from the beginning of time perspective, from God's perspective. But the duration from our perspective looking back, it was 8 billion years. Now the second day, from the Bible's perspective, lasted 24 hours. But from our perspective looking back, it lasted half of that previous day, 4 billion years. The third day also lasted half that previous day, 2 billion years. The fourth day, 1 billion years. The fifth day, 1/2 billion years. The sixth day, 1/4 billion years. Now, quite astonishingly, that's 15 3/4 billion years. You see, the more you understand modern physics and the relative nature of space-time, the more comfortable the Genesis account becomes. If there's no God, why is there something rather than nothing? That's a question that demands an answer. And in light of the evidence, we are left with only two options. Either nothing created something out of nothing, or else something supernatural created something out of nothing. Now, atheists will rarely admit that they believe in self-creation. They usually mask it with concepts such as chance creation or spontaneous generation. Yet, self-creation or spontaneous generation is analytically false. The law of non-contradiction is the foundation of formal logic. To say something is self-created is to assert that it's its own cause and its own effect. For this to be true, it would have to exist before it existed. It would have to be before it was. Now, what if Hamlet had said, to be and not to be? That is the question. Shakespeare's profundity is reduced to an absurdity. For the universe to have no cause, the universe would have to be and not be at the same time. Sadly, this is exactly what many atheists force themselves to accept in a variety of various disguises, such as spontaneous generation, or they ascribe magical creative powers to chance. Chance is not a thing. It cannot cause anything. It appears atheists prefer to sacrifice reason rather than face the inherent responsibility implied by the acknowledgement of a creator. Now, astronomer Robert Jastrow says, consider the enormity of this problem. Science has proven that the universe exploded into being in a certain moment. What cause produced this effect? Who or what put the matter and energy into the universe? Science cannot answer these questions. For the scientist who has lived by faith and power of reason, our story ends like a bad dream. We have scaled the mountains of ignorance. We're about to conquer its highest peak. We pull ourselves over the final rock, and we are greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. The evidence pointing to the God of the Bible is so compelling that it begs the question, why are so many scientists still atheists? Let's return to the cosmological argument for God's existence. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, how do atheists respond to this rock-solid argument which is backed by mathematical and scientific evidence? The formal logic of the argument is sound, So to preserve the atheistic dogma, they must attack the two premises. Now when they attack premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause, they attack reason itself. The law of causality, or cause and effect, is the founding principle of formal logic. In fact, science itself amounts to a search for cause and effect relationships. Or they can choose to attack premise 2, the universe began to exist, which is to attack the very best scientific evidence that we have. Astronomer Robert Jastrow, who is a professing agnostic, explains in his book God and the Astronomers. Theologians generally are delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning. But astronomers are curiously upset. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind. Supposedly, a very objective mind. When evidence uncovered by science itself leads to a conflict with the articles of faith in our profession. It turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated. We pretend the conflict does not exist. Or we paper it over with meaningless phrases. Note the articles of faith that Jastrow mentions. Now, everyone knows that theists have religious beliefs, but what's often overlooked is that atheistic scientists also have religious beliefs. The modern atheist portrays himself as a defender of logic and science against the religious superstitions. Yet, quite astonishingly, he turns against his own professed attributes in order to preserve his faith in atheism. This is not following the evidence where it leads. It is pure vanity. It is a curious sort of mutiny, atheism at the expense of reason and science. First, let's take a look at the devices used by atheist apologists in their war against reason. When the atheist attacks the law of causality, he undermines all logical discourse and scientific inquiry. Science is a search for causes. If the atheist succeeds in his mission to undermine premise 1, the collateral damage will destroy science itself. Curiously, they attempt to use science in destroying the possibility of science by appealing to quantum physics. Specifically, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. German physicist Werner Heisenberg formulated the uncertainty principle while working at the Institute of Copenhagen, while he was working on the mathematical foundations for quantum mechanics. Now, simply put, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that it is impossible to know both the exact position and the exact velocity of an object at the same time. However, the effect is so tiny that it's only noticeable on a subatomic scale. The atheist argument basically amounts to, if causality at the subatomic realm isn't necessary, then perhaps causality of the entire universe isn't necessary either. The best-selling author of 12 books, including Coming of Age in the Milky Way, for which he was awarded an American Institute of Physics Prize and a nomination for the Pulitzer Prize, Timothy Ferris, makes the observation regarding quantum indeterminacy. Quantum indeterminacy may have nothing to do with human will, but as a matter of philosophical taste, there are good reasons to celebrate the return of chance to the fundamental affairs of the world. He celebrates the return of chance? Now isn't this curious? Here he speaks of good reasons for celebrating the return of chance, not good reasons to actually believe in chance. I'm forced to conclude that the celebration is one of freedom from the strong scientific evidence pointing towards God. If one can force oneself to believe in the power of chance, then one has embraced irrationality and anything at all can be made true. As discussed previously, chance amounts to nothingness. It is not a cause of anything. When we speak of something like flipping a coin, we say we have a 50% chance of getting heads or tails. But no one in their right mind believes that a magical force called chance causes the coin to land on heads. Do they? If chance is really a cause, cows can fly. So basically, atheists are arguing that indeterminacy or uncertainty in the subatomic world amounts to effects that do not need causes. This is logically incoherent and completely fails. It is more of a word game or an argument from ignorance than a sound argument. It confuses causality and predictability. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle does not prove that the movement of electrons is uncaused. It only describes the inability of observers to predict their location and speed at any given time. The mere fact that we can't predict something does not mean that something has no cause. The second approach of the atheist apologist is to undermine premise 2. The universe began to exist. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in 1970, mathematician Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking proved that space-time had an absolute beginning to 5 decimal places. When we say the universe had a beginning, this includes time itself. Time is the 4th dimension, which is why physicists speak in terms of the fabric of space-time. This sort of irrefutable mathematical evidence leaves the atheist in a very uncomfortable position. Quite frankly, it threatens their faith in atheism. Now, I might be accused of taking Hawking out of context when I quoted him earlier from his book A Brief History of Time, saying that it became more and more clear that the universe must have a beginning in time, because Hawking now attempts to distance himself from that conclusion. I didn't bother to address it earlier because I was discussing scientific evidence. His recent attempts are not scientific, but philosophical. Fortunately, true science is not governed by the emotional whims of atheists. A cause by definition precedes an effect. The cause of time is by definition supernatural and beyond the grasp of science. The best scientific answer is, we don't know. The best logical inference is God. To avoid this, Hawking invented a concept he calls imaginary time. Yes, you heard me correctly, imaginary time. This is because he knows and admits that it is a fact that real time had a beginning. So, in an attempt to explain away the beginning, one must leave real time in favor of imaginary time. Now, if one is willing to leave reality behind for the land of imagination, I suppose any theory you want to assert can be true. We might as well call Hawking's theories based on imaginary time bedtime stories for atheists. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Does this verse hold up to examination? It absolutely does. And the words of today's top atheist scientists reveal it. Anthony Flew, the celebrated philosopher and former high priest of atheism, spectacularly changed his mind and shocked the world by renouncing his atheism. He said, "The argument for intelligent design is enormously stronger than when I first met it. It seems to me that the case for an Aristotelian God who has the characteristics of power and also intelligence is now much stronger than it ever was before. A change of mind which occurred because he followed the scientific evidence where it led him." Physicist Paul Davies, while officially an agnostic, has written in his book Superforce, "The laws of physics seem themselves to be a product of exceedingly ingenious design." He further testifies in his book Cosmic Blueprint, "There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems though someone has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming." Now, most astonishingly, in his recent debate on the existence of God held at Oxford University, even the deacon of Darwinism, Dick Dawkins, recently conceded to the mathematician John Lennox that a serious case can be made for a deistic God. This represents a vast departure from the atheist fundamentalist posturing he offered up in his pop culture fluff philosophical piece called The God Delusion. In light of his recent waffling, perhaps it should be retitled The God Confusion. I also suppose he must retract his earlier assertion that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. as modern cosmology has made atheism a tenuous position with no evidence to support it. The precision of the fine-tuning of the universe has undermined the creeds of atheism to such an extent that many prominent scientists have chosen to embrace the many worlds idea borrowed from occultic Eastern religion. To explain away the fine-tuning, detractors of design have been forced to resort to the unscientific many worlds or parallel universes hypothesis, and basically argues that if there's an infinite number of universes, then any combination of mathematical constants is possible in a given universe. Then by chance alone, lucky us, a life-permitting universe will appear in the ensemble. Indeed, it will appear an infinite number of times. So just so you understand how unscientific and fantasy-laden this multiverse idea really is, lucky us. One can also argue that given an infinite number of universes, there must exist a universe in which Charlie the Unicorn and Candy Mountain are actually real.
Charlie?
Does this sound like science? Well, it's perfectly valid reasoning in the multiverse hypothesis. One must ask oneself, if atheists are willing to embrace the existence of Charlie the Unicorn and Candy Mountain as a scientific possibility,
Charlie?
why do they reject the existence of God and the pursuit of intelligent design hypothesis?
God doesn't even exist, for goodness sake.
Obviously, it has nothing to do with evidence. No matter what smokescreen they hide behind, the essence of atheism is they fear personal accountability to God. In addition, M theory, the theory which supposedly governs the multiverse, works only if there are exactly 11 dimensions. But it does nothing to explain why precisely that number of dimensions should exist. So one must ask the multiverse believer, isn't the multiverse itself describable by specific physical laws? Don't those laws themselves include constants and boundary conditions which must be finely tuned in order for the multiverse to exist? So all the lucky us multiverse hypothesis does is at best push the problem up a level, but it still requires fine-tuning. Not to mention, what about the origin of the multiverse? It's rather amusing the strange ideas men come up with when they deny their creator. The bottom line is, there's no evidence for the alternate universes, and this idea is better categorized on the library shelf next to Scientology rather than science. To address the lucky us argument, an analogical reply has been developed by the philosopher William Lane Craig. The atheist argument states that since we're here, all of this must have just happened by material forces. Lucky us, lucky us, lucky us. Craig's counter-argument states, suppose a dozen sharpshooters are sent to execute a prisoner by a firing squad. They all shoot a number of rounds in that direction, but the prisoner escapes unharmed. The prisoner could conclude, since he's still alive, that all the sharpshooters missed by some extremely unlikely chance. He may wish to attribute his survival to some remarkable piece of good luck, but he would be far more rational to conclude that the guns were loaded with blanks, or that the sharpshooters had deliberately missed. Not only is life itself overwhelmingly improbable, but its appearance almost immediately, perhaps in as short as a period of 10 million years following the solidification and cooling of the once molten planet, defies explanation by conventional physical and chemical laws. One of the criticisms leveled at intelligent design is that it is not science because it cannot be tested. This is simply not true. As astrophysicist Hugh Ross, founder and president of Reasons to Believe, offers discerning readers a comprehensive, testable creation model. He has long predicted that the more we learn about the universe, the more fine-tuning we will discover. This prediction is easily falsifiable. New evidence is discovered on a daily basis that is making the argument for the existence of God based on the fine-tuning of the universe a virtual slam dunk for theism. I would like to refer you to astrophysicist Hugh Ross's website, Reasons to Believe. Recent discoveries such as dark energy, which is tuned to the preposterous degree of 1 in 10 to the 120th power, have literally knocked the ball out of the park for the fine-tuning argument. Those who favor naturalism had long sought to find the simplest explanation for the universe, hoping to avoid any evidence for design. Now, a Big Bang model in which there's just enough matter to equal the critical density to account for a flat universe would have provided that. But this is not the case at all. It has been evident for many years that there is less than half the amount of matter in the universe to account for a flat universe. A cosmological constant would provide an energy density to make up for the missing matter density, but would require an extreme amount of fine-tuning. A recent study using the balloon-borne microwave telescope called Boomerang has confirmed that there's a springiness to space, an energy density often referred to as dark energy. This is the sought-after cosmological constant. It causes the universe to expand at a faster rate. The more it expands, the faster it expands. Now, the Boomerang study demonstrated that this dark energy density is exactly what one would expect to get a flat universe. How finely tuned must this energy density be to get a flat universe? 1 part in 10 to the 120th. Recalling the description that Dr. John Lennox gave, that was only 1 in 10 to the 40. The elegant and preposterously delicate balance is no accident. What do naturalists have to say about it in the peer-reviewed science journals? A recent article in the prestigious journal Nature states that this type of universe seems to require a degree of fine-tuning of the initial conditions that is in apparent conflict with common wisdom. Common wisdom is common only to those who must exclude a supernatural explanation for the creation of the universe. Now, when a model does not work, scientists must be willing to give up their model for a model that fits the facts better. In this case, the supernatural design model fits the data much better than the naturalistic random chance model. Atheism is literally crumbling under the weight of the evidence. The implications of design derived from physics and chemistry have so undercut atheism that atheists are refusing to even look at the evidence in biology. Very much like the Vatican's censorship of Galileo, while Galileo was never an atheist, in a sense the roles are reversed. The modern atheistic magisterium has mounted a propaganda campaign to exclude any mention of design in biology. Nobel Prize-winning biologist Francis Crick said, "Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved." Doesn't this sound like brainwashing? Why must they constantly keep it in mind and ignore what they see? This truly reminds me of the scene in The Wizard of Oz, when the wizard says to Dorothy, "Ignore the man behind the screen." Atheists are determined to undermine the publication of scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals, and have resorted to overt intimidation techniques to prevent the dissemination of information. This is atheism at all costs, and reflects desperation. As revealed in the documentary Expelled, scientists pursuing the design hypothesis in the field of biology are arbitrarily discriminated against with extreme prejudice. A scientist doesn't even have to believe in creationism or ID. Merely mentioning it will get you fired. This unfortunate reality has taken on dark Orwellian overtones in Europe, when a once respected member of the Royal Academy of Sciences in England, Professor Michael Rice, the education director for the society no less, was forced to retire for merely suggesting that teachers engage students in discussion of intelligent design or creationism. He's a devout Darwinist. He simply advocated viewing creationism as a student's worldview to better educate them. The mere suggestion of meeting the student where they are and engaging in a dialogue resulted in his censure and forced retirement. This sounds more akin to Islam than academia. Nevertheless, it is the truth. Why couldn't have natural forces produce the universe? Because there was no nature, and there were no natural forces ontologically prior to the Big Bang. Nature itself was created at the Big Bang. That means the cause of the universe must be something beyond nature, something we would call supernatural. It also means that that supernatural cause of the universe must at least be Spaceless because it created space. Timeless because it created time. Immaterial because it created matter. Powerful because it created it out of nothing. Intelligent because the creation event in the universe was precisely designed and finely tuned. Personal because it made a choice to convert a state of nothing into something. The evidence points directly to God. As a final note, I'm only certain that the path to true understanding of this universe is through the revealed Word of God and relationship with Jesus Christ. Once you grasp that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, the rest is just the details. Now, it has been my goal to demonstrate that the best scientific data supports that fact. It is a lie from the pit of hell that there is no evidence for God and creation. Logic and science point directly to the God of the Bible. This presentation was made to encourage believers because I'm not under the illusion that I can convince atheists of anything. Nor do I hate atheists, but I do hate atheism. To those of you in open rebellion against your Creator, Jesus died for you. Humble yourself and ask Him to bring you to true saving faith, for it comes through Him alone. I am fully aware that if it were not for the grace of God, there go I.